have groups of philosophers, the Greek philosophers. So, for example, Friedrich Nietzsche, and his philosophy is out there now, and others, right? So Plato, and others. So now when we go into the Indian philosophy, right, and then we talk about religion. So the philosophy is a product of religion, at least in my view. We want to, let's just say that we remove the Abrahamic religions out of the discussion, because these are more revealed religions. When we are looking at Greek religions and the Indian religions, which look at the four religions from India, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, these are not religions that are revealed. You do not have somebody who is saying this is the word of God. You have the concept of God in divine entities, but then you have how are they actually propagated is by a group of philosophers, writers, writing a set of texts. And Hinduism has a whole library of such books. And then we have some of the summary books, such as the Bhagavad Gita, which basically encompasses and summarizes whole of Hindu philosophy. So, of course, you can have a group of people agreeing to a set of ideals anywhere in the world, but then the question is, where did that begin first in the history of philosophy? So if you look at the history of philosophy, the Hindu philosophers predated the Greek philosophers. The reason why we are calling Indian philosophy is because those four religions are part of it. But the point I'm trying to make here, from a religion perspective, science and philosophy, at least in India and in most of the West, were not separate things, right? From religion emerged philosophy, from religion emerged science, right? From religion emerged mathematics, right? So, for example, the whole idea of the modern science, including our computers that we are using, the construction, is all based on the binary number system. And the name of Pingala Institute, which John is a member of and we are all of, is based on Pingala, who was born some 2,400 years ago, who actually wrote a text about the binary number system, where he defined the binary number system. In the West, it's just last few hundred years the binary number system has been discovered, rediscovered. And the West claimed that, okay, we have invented this system, right? The West were using the Roman numerals, and they didn't have a concept of zero. After the binary number system, and around that time came the decimal number system, and Pingala, Aryabhat, and others, they devised it, and this is before 2000 years. In the West, those things were not there, right? So there was a design of Indian or Hindu temples, and the design needed trigonometry and geometry. And that's why there are texts in India about geometry and trigonometry. And there's a Sanskrit term for trigonometry, trigonometry, and that basically became trigonometry. So there are a number of these things that happened in that civilization. And we need to note that we are looking at India, if we are looking at 5 BCE to 5th century AD, that 1,000 years, that was a time when it was having the golden age of civilization. And any country that has fruitful and they have enough food and resources, then there will be development of science, technology, and philosophy. And that is what happened in the West in the last 500 years or so. And I am not saying that everything came out of India or China or the East. I'm just saying that we just need to recognize in academia some of those scientists that have contributed to the history of philosophy and history of science. and going back to the decimal number system, the concept of zero. So we look at the human civilization. Okay, let's say even if we have 100,000 year history and some kind of a history of development of 10,000 years, for all those while people did not know how to represent nothing, right? And nothingness came from India, from a culture, a religious or spiritual culture, where meditation was the key thing to understand the human psychology. And in meditation, you go to the highest state of meditation where you say you are in nothingness, right? And you are in a state where you become one with God. So there's nothingness and there's infinity. And those concepts from religion basically motivated the decimal number system. And this is well documented out there. It's something that these discussions with scientists, usually they'll say, oh no, this is religion is hocus pocus, this mumbo jumbo. I don't want to talk about it. We have this a lot in the new generation, right? But I am talking about analysis of religion, and there's a whole area called comparative religion, philosophy of religion, where you do not need to be a believer in a religion, like you do not need to believe in Hinduism or Buddhism to actually understand Buddhism or Hinduism. You can study them as a non-believer. So, I mean, from a Western philosophy, what is your view, John, from when you look at the religion and the development of Western philosophical schools?
So yeah, there's a long, I mean, religion and philosophy have been intertwined in the Western tradition, but there's also been a long-standing tension. And you can argue a lot of the development of Western philosophy has been about how atheists and religious people have kind of fought over the boundaries of knowledge. And in some senses, it's still ongoing when we think about topics like the nature of mind. You'll get things like, there's only a couple of kind of strands of solution that people propose. There will be people who will like a kind of, the mathematician Roger Penrose, who thinks that whatever happens in the nature of mind, we can't explain with, unless we start invoking quantum physics. So there was what was in sort of cognitive science, there was a trend for a while where they talked about quantum effects in microtubules in the brain, because they thought that quantum physics could come to the rescue of giving us some sense of free will. There's people who think that it's inherently irreconcilable, and that there's the mind and the physical world are separate from each other, and that typically comes from the religious tradition. And there are those who think that no, actually that some form of physical determinism is the best method we've got to understand the nature of the mind. And so even within those three strains, you see perfectly this kind of tension between the religious impulse and the kind of atheistic impulse. And I think that tension is one of the things that has kind of driven, I can't speak for any other traditions, but in Western philosophy it's one of the tensions that's driven things for a long time.
I think, yeah, I agree with you, and I think the thing is that what we need to note is that our education system in the East, Australia, including Beijing, Delhi, so all these cities and countries, they are having an education system which has been heavily influenced from the West, right? So we could say that there was a transfer of knowledge of the ancient world to the West through invasions and migration. So we are looking at invasions of India and migrations, and some of the texts. So I would like to say that I think I was reading about it. You can correct me later, but before 12th century, the West did not know about how to calculate the area of a triangle.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, the thing is, so you had the West. There were concepts about such as Pythagoras theorem in the West. Pythagoras, 5th century, right? But those concepts are in the Hindu texts way before that, 1,000 years before that. And they are also part of the Sumerian texts. So the thing is, what actually, if you look at trigonometry, the things that they are there, sine and cosine, for example,
Yeah.
can you do that, those angle, those geometry without zero, right? I don't know if there was some way of doing it, calculating the value of pi. Like, if you take zero out of the equation, what will be your decimal points be like? What the concept of decimal points, decimal number system? I don't know. I know that pi was something very spiritually, religiously calculated in the ancient world in the East. I don't know how they were doing it without the decimal number system. But I read that Aryabhat, 5th century AD, who is a prominent Indian philosopher and scientist, who wrote the text for the decimal number system. And the decimal number system and binary number system, this is the texts that we are talking about, Pingala and Aryabhat, are written down. But these systems, because Hinduism itself has propagated through word of mouth, singing the verses, the hymns have been sung. So the Vedas, which is dated more than 4,000 years in written text, they say it's been sung for thousands of years before that. So it's singing. So this decimal number system, binary number system, I believe were well known before it was written, similar to that concept. And when the Arabs invaded India, they translated Aryabhatarian, the text, into Arabic. Then from there, those trigonometric concepts kind of were taken by the Persian scholars, and infusion of already existing Persian mathematics and science with the decimal number system gave rise to a new generation. So you have Abu Sena, for example. Abu Sena and his team, I mean, he was a polymath and he did written a lot of books in Iran, and then it got later translated to Latin, and this is post 12th century. So what the Western world's science is a lot of work from the Persian mathematicians and scientists actually. So that's one thing we need to know too.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fairly well known, so I think a couple of things are true of that. Like, I think it's certainly true that the West has borrowed and taken ideas from all around the world. Some of those are attributed, some of those are not. We know the word algorithm, it's borrowed from Persian civilization, and that's kind of well documented. There's probably examples of many other things that have been borrowed or stolen that haven't been acknowledged and probably for a mixture of malevolent and kind of benign reasons. Some of it could be, things sort of forgotten through the annals of history. I think one of the things the West has done, the Western intellectual has been good at it, is recognizing good ideas in other civilizations and borrowing them, working with them. And I think that's why it is such like Western. What we call the Western tradition is actually a mishmash of stuff that's been borrowed from all over the world. You're already shaking your head.
I mean, although I may seem like the guy who is complaining about West not recognizing the East when it comes to the development of science and technology, I do value the contribution of Western, especially the German academics in the 18th century. They were the Max Müller and others. They were the ones who translated the Vedic text, the Upanishad, the Vedas, from Sanskrit to English. And it even during time of Hitler, these texts were very popular, and that's why Hitler, the Nazi movement, took the Sanskrit symbol, the swastika, tilted it, because they were quite interested they found it quite intriguing. And we have, in India, there's more than 2,000-year-old texts about plastic surgery. The father of surgery is attributed to Churchland, who was around 2,500 years ago, so he's written texts then. The problem is that selected universities in the West have really shown this. And unfortunately, when you think about studying Hinduism from a very secular or academic perspective, you don't have programs in India where you can do a bachelor's degree in Hindu studies or a master's, but we have it only in Oxford University. And we have a group of universities in the West have some Sanskrit departments, which the Indian universities have not done. So they are Indian universities, and the civilization is been quite slow to actually promote their own history. So this is why I think we need to recognize the work that's done by the Western intellectuals. I think there was a whole program about 5 years ago. There's a group here wanted to introduce a whole bachelor's degree in Western civilization, and there was an uproar in the media. And University of Sydney said no to that program, and UNSW said no to it, and I think eventually it was taken by Wollongong or some university on that similar level. And the reason was that it sounds that Western civilization, it's like what to call Western civilization? What are you going to teach in that program? Because Western civilization is a product of many different ideas from different civilizations. Anyways, I would like to just divert this topic a little bit, because we did discuss about the other things that a lot of people want to hear.
Yeah, thank you for the interview. So, one of the primary hot terms at the moment is AI. And where do you think philosophy falls in this realm of AI that we are talking about?
Yeah.
So, John, do you want to start?
I'm happy to.
Yeah.
So the Western sort of tradition of philosophy of mind has been around for a long time, and it's actually always struggled. There's always been a toing and froing between the idea of whether how much of knowledge is innate, so that like you're just born with it, versus how much of it do you learn from experience. And it's actually been sort of flip-flopping on this, both in sort of original philosophical texts and all the people who've been influenced by this. So for example, in sort of linguistics, Chomsky was very influential in sort of putting forward this idea that language has a natural structure in the brain, and that solves what they used to call the sparsity of stimulus problem, which is that humans aren't exposed to enough language to learn it as a pure formal system without some kind of inbuilt knowledge. So that sort of tension between structure and content has been there in philosophy from the very start, of the Western tradition of philosophy of mind, and AI is kind of just contributing to that. So you can ask similar things about. So a great example now is everyone has been, I would say most people have been perplexed by the fact that LLMs work, in the sense that you can simply digest enough text to build a statistical model that by predicting one word at a time in a sequence of tokens, you can get something that looks like human readable text. That is kind of perplexing to most people. Had you asked most experts 5 years ago, they would have said it's probably not. That simpler model that just produce a probability distribution over next tokens, choose one, feed the thing back into itself, you're going to get human-looking text. No one would have thought that was possible. And however, it's also, I mean, people emphasize the fact that compute's involved, large bodies of text involved, but it's also heavily dependent on the specific neural network architecture, the self-attention mechanism, which allows you to gradually modify the representation of the meaning of a word based on all the other words in the text. That architecture seems to be critical to it. So there's a philosophical dimension to that. Like, is it possible to do the same trick without that specific architecture? And if it's not, that says something about the kind of structures you need to get that kind of behaviour.
Do you want to add to that?
The AI and philosophy of mind. So I just want to say that philosophy of mind is approached differently from the Western school of thought, Western philosophy and the Eastern philosophy. So as far as I know, in the Eastern philosophy, Hinduism and Buddhism, these schools have the mind, see the mind as a sense organ. So you have 5 senses, you see the mind as an organ. Whereas in the Western thought, the mind is you, something that you identify with. And then with the mind comes the ego and the mind are the intellect, and that's most of the Western science sees that as a projection of the human brain. Whereas that debate is not in the East. The East, the debate is not there. So that's why in the West you have the mind-body problem, and it's a big problem. There's not that we are not short of much problems, but the mind-body problem is a big problem for philosophers, right? And basically the question is a very simple problem: are you the mind or you the body? It means that when your brain dies tomorrow, when we all die, will our mind remain? That's the mind-body problem. But for the Eastern philosophy, because that philosophy of reincarnation and rebirth are highly ingrained in there, so in the founding principles, there was no room to have the mind-body problem. So, which is quite interesting. So people were not debating, you are the mind or body or anything. Rather, the duality, so that's the duality in the West. The example is the particle wave is the duality example, and mind-body problem. Actually, the wave and the particle thing came about much later, where the mind-body problem is thousands of years old, right? That duality took over. Whereas in the East, the duality is, firstly, there are 6 schools of Hinduism, 6 theist schools of Hinduism, and theism in Hinduism does not really mean that you believe in God. Actually, the theist schools were that do you accept the Vedas, that is the foundation of religion, right? And the Vedas and the books of the Vedas, such as the Bhagavad Gita. And then the other side, the other 3 schools of Indian philosophy are Buddhism, Charvak, and Jainism. So Charvak is seen as the school of atheism actually, and Buddhism and Jainism are the non-theist schools. So atheism and non-theist schools, basically they opposed the Vedas. So again, there's a duality in the East, in the West, that you are an atheist or a theist. You believe in God or you don't believe in God. But that duality is not in the West, because in the East, because atheism does not really mean believe in God. That thought was never there. It's seen as a thought that's like, from a Hindu perspective, if you travel back in time 2000 years, you talk to a Hindu, that there's a group of people who say that the universe came about by itself, and it's all a random process, and this human body and all the life, this whole complex world is all out of a random process. That group of Hindus would see you completely crazy. They'd be like, oh, what the hell is going on here? But now you have this group of people who are academics in prominent universities who are claiming these things, right? And the problem is,
So I think this it boils down to, there's a core problem for thinking about this, and that is, you either have to assume that something came from nothing or something has always been there, and neither of those two things kind of intuitively make sense to them. I think one of my favourite atheists, Christopher Hitchens, used to say he doesn't have a problem with deism, which is the idea people who just believe that there is a God, but they're not going to impose structure on it because it solves this problem. You either have to believe something that has always existed or something came from nothing. His kind of core problem is when you start to sculpt that and say that you know specifics about the God, that's when kind of cultural problems emerge.
Yeah, and I just want to thanks John for saying the term belief, because just because you are a scientist doesn't mean you do not believe. You, or just because you are an atheist, you do not believe. You cannot exist without belief. The Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita tells Arjuna that you cannot exist without action. You are going to do something, and that's where the term karma comes from. You are either going to go to war or you are not going to go to war. But you will choose one of those. And dharma is the set of the ethics that defines what action you are going to take, right? And the dharma, ethics, education is part of ethics, right? So belief is also an act of action. You cannot exist without believing. You are going to believe in something, right? Statistics.
But sorry, I don't think that any atheists think that they don't believe in it.
Yeah.
I think they think that they have different rules for choosing what they believe.
Yeah, I'm completely fine with an atheist who is so we have atheists like Hitchens, you have Neil deGrasse Tyson, and this and who's the other one? Dawkins, right? So see, these guys are completely. It's good what they are doing, right? They are against man-made religions that are creating dogma, right? And you say you don't question these and you'll be put in prison. I love that. It's good. What I don't agree with them is, firstly, they are not scholars of comparative religion. None of them have published a single journal paper in a comparative religion journal. None of them have any qualifications in comparative religion, right? So you need to have some background in that area. You should have read the texts, you should read the commentaries of the development of religious texts to really have a background about it. You cannot make general statements that, okay, because as I said, that the definition of things in different cultures are very different. The term God cannot be translated in Hinduism because Hinduism is pantheism, and people think it is monotheism, where you have one God, which is Abrahamic religions. And Hinduism is usually blamed for being polytheism. You see, too many gods, how do you guys cope? Right? But Hinduism is pantheism. Nature, the creator and creation are the same. We are all gods or form of God, trying to understand our truth. So,
thank you. I have another question which is slightly different yet related to this discussion. So, what philosophical questions do you think that AI has now opened up that humanity had not been discussing in the last thousands of years with this development of these new language models, which are relatively good? Are there things that are coming up?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The first one that comes to mind is that I think because the notion of AI that could do that could appear to be human in the way it thinks about things, not that we're really there yet, but there are enough people now who kind of believe LLMs have gotten us close enough that we have to kind of take that claim seriously. I think we've never articulated the idea that whether it's possible to have something that behaves intelligently, approximately human level, without being sentient. Like, I think in the West, we'd kind of assumed that those two things came together. and now we have to sort of seriously question whether those two things are actually separate.
I think that that points to, so there was an International Journal of Machine Consciousness. It stopped publishing in the year 2015. Enough papers. So machine consciousness is a field actually, and it's also known as artificial consciousness, right? And consciousness studies is a field of its own. At UNU we have a Center for Consciousness Studies. And around the world there are several universities who are taking interest in this area, and it's a very multidisciplinary field. You have biologists, neuroscientists, psychologists, and AI people too. What is conscious? And so you have David Chalmers, who is the world leader in consciousness studies, and Professor Chalmers has defined the problem of the self, the problem of self-awareness, and hard problem of consciousness. So there's the easy problems of consciousness, which AI can tackle. You have easy problems such as cognition, planning, optimization. These are some of the easy recognition, easy problems of consciousness. The hard problem of consciousness is something that is also known as the self or the qualia that we have. I know that I am experiencing the world. There's something within me is experiencing the world, but I do not know if you are experiencing the world. So John, you could be completely a robot. I wouldn't be able to test you, right? I mean, these days it's hard for us to test ChatGPT, and there's this Chinese room argument as well, which is a philosophical problem in AI, right? So it's hard. It will be in the coming decades. We are going to have pet dogs, pet cats. We are going to have artificial agents helping monitor our old and even our young. And that time will come post 2050. Maybe we will not be able to know if there's a robot or a human in front of us.
Okay. So that actually leads me to my last question. Last question is, do you think we can see a point in future where AI is doing physical reveals within or with people or within itself? So the age-old question of when do you think AI becomes sentient enough for physicals, for psychological
Tough
reasons?
question, yeah.
It's purely opinion.
It kind of depends on what you mean by a philosophical debate.
Yeah, mind-body problem. You tell AI to you say, ask ChatGPT, what is the mind-body problem?
Yeah.
ChatGPT will take things from sources in academic journals, in Wikipedia, everywhere, and it's going to summarize you and tell you what it is. But whether it is going to be on that level to debate is a good thing. It's an interesting thing. So you see, probably with ChatGPT and related GPT technology, you could make avatars of scientists. So you would have somebody, an avatar of academics, somebody who's interested in Hindu philosophy, a Hindu philosopher academic, AI academic, biologist academic, a neuroscientist academic, and then you ask them questions about mind-body problem. Then they would be able to give their view, and you could see that as a debate. I think that would happen very soon, in the next 5 years. Maybe it could be a project of our group.
So do you want to add something on that?
No, I agree. Like, I think remixing, creating a debate as remixing, because you can think of LLMs as kind of remix agents. They're remixing existing sort of text and knowledge. We haven't seen, even the recent papers that have been talking about using LLMs for generating research ideas, it's kind of, it's fairly incremental stuff. So in the history, in the tradition of philosophy of science, there was a writer by the name of Kuhn who talked about this idea of revolutionary science, and saying that basically a lot of science was what called normal science, where people are proposing small experiments, minor changes, just adjusting, doing more empirical work, moving along, and over time you accumulate lots and lots of observations of oddities and errors and things that you need to resolve. So, and then someone comes along, like an Einstein, who can look at, we've got all these problems in the data, I need to sort of work out how to resolve those, and that's kind of revolutionary science. So what we're seeing is people designing ways to do LLMs for the normal science, like what's the next incremental experiment we could do to collect reasonable data. No one has shown anything that looks vaguely like what a revolutionary science would be, which is also capable, like an LLM that's capable of generating novel ideas into a debate that isn't coming from some kind of source text.
I would like to revisit the definition of philosophy and coming back to science and PhD thing, right, which you asked earlier. The thing is that first you have a school of computer science and you have a school of computer engineering, let's say, and students are confused. What should be actually the name of the school? Should we call it computer science or computer engineering? What is engineering and what is science? So engineering, the definition basically quite simply is, at least in my view, is things you make to actually transform or improve the world around you to solve problems, right? Science is actually a methodology to test things. That's how I could see in a simple way. So you have developed an engine that, for example, for a car, and you have an older car, and you want to kind of say if this engine is better than the older car's engine, then you have to test it. So when you are going to test two things, and testing and evaluation of things that are similar is very hard. So you are going to do some repetitive experiments, right? When you are doing that, you firstly, the moment you start recording things, you need to note that you are following a system of philosophy, and that is positivism. So most of the science that we are doing now is from positivism. Most of the research methods because positivism is all about documenting data well and having a coherent set of questions and arguments and logical constructs, and there's inference and deduction. Inference, deduction, positivism, these are all philosophical schools and products of those schools that we are using in everyday science as scientists. So if there's a guy who says, I'm a scientist and I'm not using philosophy, that's not true. The other thing is that you are using statistics as a tool to make summary statistics about two things that you want to compare, right? You are saying, okay, I'm going to compare these two distributions and I'm going to just compare mean. The moment you are saying I'm going to compare means and standard deviations, you are taking a philosophical viewpoint. You are restricting yourselves their limitations. And this actually happened during COVID-19. The way you are going to document things, the way you are going to ask research questions can affect the experiment and your conclusions. And during COVID-19, we had this AstraZeneca, vaccines were tested, and there was this group of people, 10,000 people were given, those vaccines, and 10,000 were not. And the reports came, then of course the average showed better. But then if you group those averages into different sets of age range, people who are above 65, below 65, and above 50, for example, then you'll have differences in means. So it's all about how you set things up. So this is why all these things that we have, these modern statistics, we're looking at a few hundred years old. And one thing that I was questioning John and Rodney earlier, we were discussing this, that I do not know we have Indian philosophy and mathematics which goes more than 2,000 years old. We have history of decimal number system. You have computation, multiplication, all those rules set up there. But the idea of comparing two things just by taking the mean or the standard deviation or some type of a mean was not really a popular idea back in ancient India. I don't know why. In the history of statistics, don't go far that long back in ancient civilizations. Probably and now, I think there's this whole issue of p-values ongoing now. So most of the science that we know is based on statistics, because statistics is used to test hypotheses and depends on what viewpoint you are going to take. And this time that we have the development of the decimal number system, binary number system in India, at that time science was in terms of the science that was there called pramana. Pramana is more about evidence-based thinking, and that is something that has influenced the 18th, 19th century schools of positivism in the West. Taking evidence, if a civilization is asking about who you are, where are we in the universe, of course they will be, and they can develop ancient magnificent temples. Of course they will be quite interested to know and tell what are the limitations of measuring things. And this is something that our modern scientists are completely ignoring, or we are not taught. We cannot blame our PhD students because they are not forced to take a philosophy of science course, and history of science course. So the thing is, if you look at the Pramana Sutras, and then you have the 6 Hindu schools of philosophy. One school of philosophy is Nyaya, and that is the foundations of the Hindu mathematics and law. So Pramana, kind of goes into the Hindu schools and the Jain schools, and the texts basically say things about when you take observations, you need to kind of assess what mood you are in, because depending on your mood, you are going to note things down. This is we're looking at time when we didn't have specific instruments. So your mood, when we are evaluating students' assignments, for example, essays, and when reviewers are reviewing our papers, the mood is completely ignored, right? So a lot of science that is probably bad gets published, good science gets rejected. This is the mood of reviewers actually. So science, and a lot of it is not producible, right? So I think people need to question about statistics, philosophy of science, and kind of open up to philosophy and spirituality, and stop putting people in there. This guy is going to church, I don't want to listen to him. This guy is going to temple, I don't want to listen to him. We need a multidisciplinary focus in academia, with academics having discussions like this, right? And that's how we're going to grow.
Thank you, Rohit, and thank you, Dr. Hawkins, for yes, G.
In all round, I would like to ask Dr. Rohit, does it mean philosophy, from your point of view, and religion is the same thing? Are you trying to say there is no difference between philosophy and religion? And then, can you just give in a simple term what you can say philosophy is?
Okay, I think religion has emerged out of philosophy, right? And the problem in religion comes because it is a set of beliefs, right? But it has philosophical foundations. All the world's religions. Philosophical foundations simply means a group of people agreeing to something, right? The problem is that when that group take it emotionally and saying that, hey, my way is the only way and you cannot change my way. So in Nature Human Behavior, I have written an essay about Hinduism and the quest for truth and how it relates with science. So from a Hindu and a Buddhist Jain philosophical perspective, the truth is the most important thing, and both science and the religions, they try to uncover the truth, right? When you become too emotional, you become aggressive, you're not going to uncover the truth. But a lot of religions have been talking about truth, but formally in the history of religions, some religions have taken really invested a lot of time in understanding and defining what the truth is. So, for example, Shankaracharya, who is a 7th century Hindu philosopher, his texts were all about interpreting the Bhagavad Gita, and he has invested a significant amount of time defining the nature of truth. What does truth mean actually? People, I want to reach the truth. Somebody says word of God is the truth, for example. Some religions say that. So Shankaracharya says that everything that's written there, like, it's not truth, because Hindu philosophy is based on the concept that the whole world changes all around us. And that's why they call it Maya, illusion. And truth is something that does not change when the world is changing around us. So that is why Shankaracharya calls self, or Atman, that qualia within us that defines the heart problem of consciousness, as the truth. There's something in us that does not change with time, that witnesses the world around us. That's what Shankaracharya calls the truth. So philosophy and religion, they go hand in hand, and they both need each other, just as science and philosophy, I guess. John, you
Concluding remarks, John.
So yeah, it's similar. I would say that they both come from the same source, which is human desire to understand, and that so as soon as you start to ask more complicated questions that you may not have the empirical or rational means immediately in front of you, something like philosophy or religion emerges. Now, I guess the definition's a little bit fuzzy. I think part of the reason why the tension is so strong in the West is because our religions have been so dogmatic. So there's actually
political as well.
And political, yeah. So one way people have quite often framed it is that it's actually one formulation I've heard from people is that pre-modern philosophy in the West was heavily metaphysics driven, which means it was born from a group of people who had an idea about how the world was, and everything flowed from that. Epistemology, morality, everything sort of flowed from that metaphysical core set of beliefs. And that the emergence of the science in the West was a flipping of that, so epistemology came first. So all of a sudden you weren't saying we don't know what the nature of the world is, we want to focus on methods for knowing, and and metaphysics can come from epistemology. So, and that flipping was kind of where the tension between church and science kind of came from, and we've just been still sort of grinding up against that ever since.
Okay. Thank you again, John and Rohit, for your wonderful discussion on this wide range of topics that we have covered, mainly looking at the philosophy of science, religion, AI, and thank you for your time, and thank the audience for your ears for listening throughout this discussion. We'll end this session here, and if there are any questions, we'll take it offline and we can discuss then, or we will meet in our next discussion series, which will come in a couple of weeks. Thank you again, and bye from all of us here.
Do you need any snacks?
Thank
Anyone want snacks?